If you have your Bibles, we're in Ephesians 6. If you don't have a Bible, there is Bibles in the seat in front of you. And you can go ahead and open that up. If you're looking at the one in the seat in front of you, it's on page 950. Okay, I'm reading verses 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, for which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord.
I have 3 children. My oldest, 8-year-old girl, Finley, is full of energy and ideas and words. She has lots of those. You'd find her whenever there's a social gathering of any sort, she's right in the middle of it. She likes hanging out late and hanging out with people all the time. My middle, Jack, 5-year-old, he's less this way. He actually avoids large groups like this. You'll see him maybe after service sneak in a hot chocolate, then he'll disappear to some secluded place in the building, working on some invention that he found from the scraps of materials he's found from the dumpster. And then my last child, my youngest, my 3-year-old, Marlo. Marlo, we describe her as a hurricane with pigtails, and she just marches by the beat of her own drum. She does what she wants, when she wants, and that's how it goes. She really is the leader of our house. If you want to know who's in control, it's the 3-year-old. She runs everything, when we eat, what we eat, where we eat, all those things she decides. 3 kids. Now, some of you are thinking 3 sounds like a lot. And 3 is a lot of kids, especially here in Vancouver. But what's interesting is 3 might seem a lot like today, and based on how many kids people have, but only 6 decades ago, not too long ago, 3 is actually below the average birth rate. The birth rate is the amount of children a woman has. In the 1960s, the average woman would have 3.8 kids. So we're tracking behind the average in the 60s. Now, of course, that number has declined over these last decades drastically, even significantly in this last decade, in 2010s to now, where the average woman will have 1.43 children. This is not surprising to many of us. We live in this society where this has become a pretty common reality that we're all too familiar with. Most of us are delaying having kids, or having less of them when we do have them, or not even having kids at all. And this is not just the Western problem. This just seems to be a reality that birth rates are down across most of the world outside of the Saharan Africa. And I say problem because declining populations are a problem for economies and countries to make sense of. Countries that continue to have less and less children create havoc in the future of that economy and how it's going to make sense. Even countries like Japan, who have for a long time have had some of the lowest birth rates in the world, have created so many incentives, billions of dollars of tax breaks and initiatives and programs for parents and for women to have more children, and only to see the birth rate continue to decline, even though they've spent billions to try to create the opposite to happen. We live in the lowest birth rates in recorded history. Kevin DeYoung says, it's like the human race seems to have grown tired of itself. So why are we having less kids? Now, I ask that question knowing that it is a complex reality. These problems are never simple, and there's many different factors, and we could spend the rest of our time together to unpack why is it that we're having less kids. But I want to address three of the top reasons I think many of us are deciding to have less kids or no kids at all. The first one is affordability. The sheer cost of living is up. I don't know if you know that. It is, specifically here in Vancouver. And specifically the generation that's having kids now, the millennials, have faced more economic headwinds than any other generation has in the past century. Meaning that the markers for people that they would like to secure before having kids, like owning a home and becoming financially independent, are further out of our reach or take longer to acquire, which delays us having kids or having them at all. The second reason is marriage. Less people are getting married today, or they're having a harder time to find the one to settle down with, or they're getting married later in life if they are getting married. And those that seem to find an individual, they often cohabitate and maybe at one point get married, but maybe not. And however you feel about the institution of marriage today, that's not what we're talking about. Statistically, married couples have more children than non-married couples. And the last and final reason why I believe many are deciding to have less kids or not have them at all is the uncertainty. The future is looking apocalyptic. If you check your news feeds, you'll get warnings on almost a weekly basis that the earth is doomed and that we are facing this peril that we have uncertain ways of handling. Which raises the question, though, why are we waiting? Why are we trying to save the planet if we're not having children to habitate it in the first place? But nevertheless, these factors are real and they make sense. And to put alongside of that the improvement of birth control, which has allowed many of us to decide when or if we will have children. See, all these factors has created many to kind of decide, I'm not sure about this whole thing about parenthood. In fact, one survey, one poll that asked adults from 18 to 49, 56% of them, 56% of these adults from 18 to 49 said they do not want to have children. Over half. You and I live in a unique cultural moment. We live in a time when more of us are deciding not to have children, where for most of human civilization, that was the default position, was to have a family, have kids, but we live in one of the times where there's wrestling with should we or should we not? And the question for us today is, what does having children and becoming a parent have to do with following Jesus? Is there a connection between the two? Is there any correlation between those? Does following Jesus have anything to speak into this aspect of life? Well, according to the Apostle Paul, the one who wrote the letter, the one that you just heard read to you, Ephesians, he thinks that there is a correlation here. In fact, he takes this idea of who Jesus is and how we follow Jesus and how our commitment to Jesus trickles down to the nitty-gritty of our life, and specifically our home life, our family life, or our children and how we parent them. So we're going to look at these first four verses of chapter 6, the final chapter of Paul's letter, all around this idea of children and parenting. But before we do, just a few caveats to set a foundation. The first caveat is this. This is complex. None of us are walking into this room with a blank slate with the idea around parenting and children. We all have baggage around that, good and bad. We all have realities of this based on our family of origin and how we were parented, or what that looked like, or our connection with our children, or the connection we had with our siblings, or was that healthy or not healthy? Some of us have experiences of loss around this. Some of us understand the challenges and the inability to have children. So I just want to take a moment before we even continue on just to acknowledge the sensitivity of the subject, the complexity of it, the baggage, the feelings that might arise when you hear the subject around children and parenting. But it is our belief here at Forest City that we want to jump into these complexities. Not because we think they're just great to always talk about complex issues, but we think that's where life is most found. And that we want to draw light into these dark things and bring them into the light and to bring attention to them because we think healing is found when light is brought in. So first caveat is this is complex. Secondly, being a family is not the ultimate thing. The church, especially in this most recent season, has made getting married and having kids the most ultimate Christian ideal. I don't know if you picked up on that. I don't know if you felt that. But I just want to remind you here today, but that's not the ideal. That's not the ultimate thing. All there is merits to having kids and parenting and all those things. Knowing Jesus and experiencing his kingdom is the ultimate thing. That's why we sing about it. That's why we fix our eyes on Jesus. That's why we take so much time to constantly turn towards Jesus, because we believe the kingdom coming and Jesus' work in your life is the ultimate thing. But at times, the church has geared a lot of how we do church around families and couples, and at times that has left many of you who are single feeling isolated. But that's not how the church got started. The early church was a diverse community where singles and families were actually found community and were in relationship with one another. So I just want to take a moment to apologize to those of you that at different times have felt that the church has been very exclusive. It's been very monolithic in how we've presented what this community should look like. I believe the kingdom of God is big enough for all different kinds of people. And some of us are single, and some of us are married, and some of us are not. Some of us have kids, and some of us don't. But we all come together and wrestle with what it looks like to follow Jesus. That being said, today I'm reading a section of Paul's letter where he talks about being a parent and the importance of children. And so I'm going to be making the case for that today. But in no way do I want any of you to hear pressure that you need to have children. Please don't walk out of this place and say, well, Pastor Jordan says I need to have more kids. That's what I got from today. Rather, I want us to see the role of parenting and the place that children have in the family of God and the significance of following Jesus and what that looks like for that. Last and final caveat, I'm not a perfect parent. I know that goes without saying, but I think it's important to say. I do have 3 children, but in many ways, it's been the most stretching thing that I have done. In so many ways, I don't feel that I am a natural parent either. The reality that I have kids does not make me an authority of parenting. The same way that you owning a car does not make you a good driver. Sorry if that's news to you, but that's the reality. And so today, I'm going to try to avoid specific implications of how to parent because there's a lot of discussion and disagreement and good merits around the different things. So I'm going to avoid those hot topic subjects of sleep training and eating and diet and schooling and what all those should look like. I believe there's lots of freedom here with these. But rather, I will look at an overview of parenting based on what I believe Paul says in this particular text. Okay? So now that we've set the groundwork, taken some time, let's dig into this text, these 4 verses. We're going to look at it in 3 parts: the children's responsibility, the parents' responsibility, and then finally the church's responsibility. But first, the children's responsibility. Verse 1 of chapter 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. First of all, notice who Paul addresses this to. He says, children. This letter would have been read to the church, and in Paul's assumption is that children would be present in the church, that they would have heard these words, because Paul directs them to them. Now, today that makes sense. Because today, the family orbits their lives predominantly around the needs of the child and their different activities and school requests and all those things, that the child in many ways takes the precedent in the family unit. But the ancient world, well, that was far from this reality. See, in the ancient world, children were not seen of any value really at all. Many of times they were discarded at birth if they were the wrong gender or had some defect, or just simply they didn't want any more kids, so they got rid of it. And at this time as well, children were just seen as they could be sold into slavery, or they could work hard labor, all these things. They were just simply commodities and not seen as a high value. One scholar says this, quote, "Children in the society had no status at all. They did not count." So why are children present here? If this is the reality of the ancient world, that children had no value, then why are they present in this church community in Ephesus? Well, simply put, because Jesus put a high value on the role and the purpose and the place that children have in the Christian community. See, our image of Jesus when he's down with the children and the children all come alongside him, it's this like nice, meek and mild, kind Jesus, right? But Jesus doing this act would completely be revolutionary, would be unorthodox. This is why the disciples were shooing the kids and say, "Go, go." And we're like, those bad disciples, what were they doing? But at this time, no rabbis would want to spend time with children. Children were seen as a nuisance, as insignificant, of no value. So the very fact that Jesus leans down and invites these kids and tells his disciples, "No, let the children come," was completely revolutionary. That's not how it functioned in the ancient world. So much of Jesus' teaching was continuing to talk about the importance of formation and the discipleship of children, and the church took that to heart. So much so that decades later, when Paul's writing this letter, children are present in the community. They have equal value and equal significance. So with that being said, Paul speaks directly to them, and he says, "Children, obey your parents for this, and the Lord, for this is right." In other words, this is what's natural. This is a natural request. No surprise here. It's pretty straightforward. And I think we understand that. Almost all societies see that the parent's authority is an integral part of the stable society to function. But this word obey means to listen under. In other words, this is what obedience is. Obedience is listening to someone and doing what they say. This, by the way, is why parents, half of what they say to children is, "Are you listening? Did you hear me? Are you listening?" In other words, are you obeying what I'm saying? And Paul doesn't just leave it here, say, "Obey, children, obey your parents, for this is right," but he also gives another reason, and he quotes the fifth commandment in verse 2. He says, "Honor your father and mother," which is the first commandment with a promise. In other words, Paul's saying there's a promise built into this commandment, not a threat, but a promise. And what is the promise? Verse 3, "So that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth." Of course, Paul is not making a definitive statement here that children that obey their parents will have no challenges in life. Rather, what Paul is saying here is he's demonstrating that children who are more obedient tend to do better in society. They learn social boundaries and discipline. And the majority of cases, parents have good wisdom and should be followed. Now, this is all Paul says for us to children, but we have lots of questions, don't we? When we read something like this, we wonder, is this command unconditional, Jordan? Are there contexts where we are not to obey our parents? First of all, I just want to say, I remember being a teenager. It didn't seem that far away from me. And I remember being a teenager and growing up and my parents telling me different things and me thinking that I knew better. That I don't think that mom knows what she's talking about anymore. I think I know better, as this 13-year-old pubescent teenage boy brain does, right? I think what Paul is saying here is saying, even as children, as we're followers of Jesus, what does it mean to follow our parents the Jesus way? What does it mean when Jesus comes into our life? How would that change our interactions, our relationships with other people? It's what Amy beautifully said last week, that when Jesus comes, then we're deferring to one another. We subject ourselves to one another. And as we follow Jesus, one of the ways that we live that out is we respect our parents and honor their leadership in our life. Of course, there are scenarios where our parents ask us of things that go against our conscience or ask us to go against our faith. In our last church, I knew a teenager who her parents continually told her to stop going to church, but she continued to go. And then one day she said she wanted to be baptized, and that was the last day that she lived in that household. They kicked her out because of that. So there are scenarios, but I think for the majority of the time, our parents' wisdom is the best one for us to follow. But there does need to be a transition, right? From obedience to our parents to honoring them. As adults, we no longer have to obey our parents on where we should get our groceries or how we should even parent our kids, but how do we honor them still? What ways can we honor our parents as adults? I believe many non-Western cultures have greater intentionality with honoring their parents. Are there ways that we could do that better? So Paul begins by giving instructions and responsibility for the children, and that would be the norm. Everybody would expect that. But then he flips it on its head, and now he says, now parents, this is your responsibility. And most people would think, no, I'm just the parent. I don't need any notes. I know what my job is. I don't need any, you got to tell the kids to listen more. But Paul says this responsibility is a two-way street. He moves into verse 4 with the parents' responsibility. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training instruction of the Lord. Now, some of you notice that it says fathers here, and now you think as mothers you don't have to worry about this verse. It's not relevant to you. Of course, Paul is writing in a patriarchal society, so he writes fathers here, but the original word means both fathers and mothers. In fact, the essence of the word means those who care for the well-being of children. So single parents and caregivers and grandparents, it all applies here in this verse. And Paul's whole point here is that as followers of Jesus, when Jesus comes into our life, he changes how we see things. He changes the way that we operate. And this even means the way that we parent. So there's lots here, but I've broken it down into 3 sections. The first one is be aware. Do not exasperate your children. In other words, do not provoke them into anger or frustration. It's interesting that Paul here assumes that there is a reality that parents can be too demanding. That there's times that parents can be too over-controlling and giving no freedoms and very little trust. Simply, Paul is saying there can be a way that parenting can be destructive. But when do we parent this way? I thought about this a lot these last few weeks as I was preparing for this Sunday. When do I exasperate my children? And for me, it's when I'm not aware of the source of my frustration. If we're not aware, as parents here, I'm speaking specifically to parents, if we're not aware of our own brokenness, our own faults, our own proclivities, it will trickle down to how we parent. In fact, our children will probably receive those things more than maybe anyone else. And so I think part of us understanding how we parent and parent differently and parent the Jesus way is that we're aware of our own frustrations, our own sins, our own brokenness. And we do the work around those things. But I think the second way that we exasperate our children as well is that we've created an ideal for them. Maybe we have an ideal that our kids would be a certain type of student, a certain type of athlete. They would be a social, extroverted kid. Or that they would do certain activities or behave certain ways. And all this creates a script for our kids that they are loved based on a particular self that they present. And this powerful script that is created for the kids is one that love is now no longer unconditional. It's based on how they perform. And it can become exasperating for them. Because this whole time they feel they are not loved for who they are. They are loved of the ideal that we have for them. And sometimes this ideal is subconscious, and sometimes it's conscious. But we've created an ideal of what we feel like our children should be, or what their activities should be, or how they are to perform or step into different things. Of course, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have standards and boundaries, and we shouldn't continually encourage our kids to be stretched. But I have a sensitive son. And in many ways, I don't think I consciously thought about this, but subconsciously I had this idea that my son's going to be he's going to be my son. We're going to play sports. We're going to do man things. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't have that in my father. So I thought when I have a son, we would do those things, that this would be our kind of relationship. But man, my little Jack, he's a sensitive little kid. And he's got a lot of emotions, and I don't think I was fully prepared or ready for that. And some of the work that I had to do, some of the awareness that I had to be aware of, is what is the ideal I have for what a 5-year-old boy should be? And is that who my son is? If we're not aware of these pieces we have, parents, I think we can exasperate our kid. We can exasperate our children. That we give them no space for them to be themselves. The second aspect of this verse is what I would call connect. Instead, so if we are not to exasperate our children, what are we to do? Instead, bring them up in the training instruction of the Lord. Now that word bring them up, for most of us, we think that's just a transitionary statement. It's okay, yeah, we should raise them. But in the original language, it actually means to nourish them. Calvin actually translates it to mean to tender and to be gentle with them. Or in other words, I think probably the best translation for us today in the 21st century is to emotionally connect with them. What Paul points out here to this letter, to these churches in the area around Ephesus, is what we know centuries later to be a mountain of psychology which communicates that creating safe and secure homes for children is one of the greatest predictors of their well-being into adulthood. Individuals like Bessel van der Kolk, in his book, The Body Keeps Score, continues to demonstrate a wide array of research that tells us how the earliest years for children are so formative, that so much of their brain and their attachments and their securities and their scripts that they play are formed in those early precious years. And we understand way more about how that works and the lasting impact positively and negatively our parenting styles or our connection has with our kids at those early years. The reality is that your children will make good and poor choices. You can't fully control that. But will your home be a safe place for them? Will they feel that they can open up to you? Do you create safety for them to be them? Do you create emotional bandwidth for your kids? Are you emotionally available? Do you first connect or do you first correct? The parent that obviously I see the most upfront more than anyone else is the mother of my children, Amy. And Amy, I think, does this way better than me. Amy gives space for our children all the time. Amy constantly is taking time to connect with them. I'll take an hour to make dinner, and I think I know exactly what my kids want, and I'll put it all together, and then I put it on the plate, and Jack will just contort his body and say, "This is disgusting." And everything inside me says, "You will eat this dinner because I've just spent an hour, and it's actually what you asked me to make an hour ago." But Amy will get down at his level as he's doing some worm move like he's on fire or something. And she's like, what's up, buddy? What are you feeling right now? What's frustrating for you? Okay, can we work on a solution? Or it's at the end of the night, and I've put my kids to bed. And I've told my kids, after you go to bed, I'm not your dad anymore. He's off. When you come out and ask for dad, I don't know who he is. He's gone. I'm Jordan. This is me before kids, and I just need some time. So I'll just wait. I'll usually wait to make sure it's like quiet, but I'll boil my cup of tea. I got my little snack. I crack open my book, and my 8-year-old will come down. I've just been thinking about what Susie said to me on the playground today. Don't think about that. Go to sleep. You don't need to think about that. Well, it really upset me. These are great conversations to have over the dinner table, or the drive home, or after dinner, or before you go to bed, or bath time. Any of those times, this would be great. But right now, Amy will take her hand, and they'll go up and spend the next hour as Finley unpacks all these things and all the emotions around them. I'm sure Amy had other ideas of how her evening would look like and other hopes that she has. But she takes time to be emotionally available to connect with our children. So we are aware, we connect, and finally we instruct. And said, bring them up in the training instruction of the Lord. Now, commentators take this section of training instruction of the Lord, and they've written pages upon pages of exactly what could Paul mean here by training and instruction. And rather than to take you through all the different possibilities, I think the best understanding of this verse is found in actually the end of it. Training and instruction of the Lord. Lord here clearly means Jesus. I believe one of our primary roles as followers of Jesus, and not just parents, but I believe all of us as followers of Jesus, one of our primary roles is that we are to represent Jesus to the next generation. That our lives and the way we live, the way we interact, does it demonstrate that we live with conviction and integrity? Do we actually believe these things to be true? Do we actually live with deep conviction that Jesus is at the center of our life and he's transformed and completely changed our lives? Our children, the kids around us, they'll be able to tell us if that's true or not. See, more than a youth program, a kids' church, a Christian school, or even great mentors, parents this is primarily your responsibility of discipling, informing, and instructing, and allowing your kids to understand the ways of Jesus. So there's lots to be said about this, lots of examples I could point to. And honestly, there's many parents in our community that are really intentional in how they do this. But let me just give you one example of how I think this plays out. A few months ago, I was talking with my good friend who also has 3 children, and we were just talking about being fathers and parenting and some of those realities. And I asked him a question. I said, dude, do you ever remember your parents apologizing to you? This was the 90s, early 2000s. He's like, no, I don't have any recollection of my parents apologizing to me. I'm like, I don't either. I mean, it might have happened. I'm sure it did at one point. Maybe they accidentally smacked me in the head or whatever, but I'm sure maybe at one point they apologized, but I don't have any recollection of it. See, I'm not supposed to be a perfect parent. And maybe that's what you're hearing today. Maybe you think that following Jesus means that you are trying to get yourself to this place of being this perfect Christian parent, whatever that ideal is in your head. That's not the goal, because that's not what the gospel is. That's not what we're representing to our kids. We're not trying to become these perfect cookie-cutter parents. We are trying to become redemptive parents. What I mean by that is that we should be apologizing all the time to our children, because we make mistakes all the time. And what our kids will learn most from when we apologize is we demonstrate how we live out the gospel every single day. How we live in humility, and how we make mistakes, and how we ask for forgiveness and they give us forgiveness. That's what it means to be a redemptive parent rather than a perfect one. So I am apologizing to my kids all the time because I've got my stuff and I got my shortfalls, and at different times I get angry at them, and I'm not angry at them. I'm angry at them because something didn't turn out well here, or I'm frustrated, or I'm tired, or what have you. I don't take time to connect, and so I'm saying, get down to their level, and hey, Jack, hey, man, I'm sorry. That got a little bit upset earlier, and he raised his voice. I'm sorry about that. That's okay. Can I have a snack? Sure, dude. You can have a snack. What I want my kids to see most clearly is the gospel living in my life. What I want the kids to see clearly is how that's playing out. Kids will learn more about what we do than what we say. Finally and lastly, and I'm running out of time, is a church's responsibility. Okay, so children have responsibility, parents have responsibility, but what is our responsibility? Well, simply put, it takes a village. You might not be a parent here, but don't feel like you have no role at shaping and forming the next generation. I love this quote by Reggie Joiner. This is what he says: although the average church can never compete with what the culture can produce. Although the average church can never compete with what the culture can produce, culture can never compete with what the average church can do in the life of a kid. I am the product of a teenager who walked into a church because I didn't have a home, I didn't have a community, I didn't have family, and I found a family, I found a home, and I found a community in a small church just like this. We all have a part to play in the formation of the next generation. So if you're younger, babysit. If you're past your babysitting years, offer your wisdom or other ways you can help. Our kids program, I don't know if you know this last month, there's all these kids showing up to kids church on Sunday. I don't know where you're bringing them, I don't know where you're finding them, but they're coming. About a few weeks ago, we had like 3 kids shy of our Easter kids numbers. Easter's our biggest Sunday of the year. We almost had Easter numbers for kids just a few weeks ago. So there's places for you to get involved in forming and helping and shaping. If you are a parent here and you have young kids or you have children, lean into this community. Sometimes you're not at your best and you need to take a step back and let another parent or friend or family or relative or this community help you in the place of parenting. I'm going to invite the keys come back, and I'm going to end with the question that I started with. So why have kids? What value do children bring to your life? I think there's many things I could say, but I just want to leave with this thought. Children form us. It's interesting when I talk to couples who've been together for a while or they're married, and I talk about the prospects of kids, because I just ask those questions at different points in the conversation when I feel like it's right. And they say, well, I really like our life right now. I think kids would just really disrupt a lot of that. And I'm like, you're absolutely right, they will. But they should. They should. And the reason why is that because my deep conviction is that to be a follower of Jesus, your life is no longer about yourself. To be a follower of Jesus means that we're continually growing and being shaped and being formed in the image of Christ. And perhaps there's no better way to be formed and shaped like Jesus than to have children. Any parent can attest to that. So if your vision of life is one where you have these vacations, you have this structure, you have this life, and it's always just going to look a certain way, then sure. But if your deep conviction of life is like you hold your life in such a way that you want to be formed and shaped by what Jesus would have for you, become looking more and more like Him and molded more and more like Him. Few things will remove you from being the center of your universe more than becoming a parent. Few things will make you more keenly aware of your finitude than becoming a parent. Few things will make you learn that there is more love and more desire and more compassion in you than becoming a parent. Fewer things will bring you closer to Jesus and his love and his grace for you than becoming a parent. In short, becoming a parent will form you. Perhaps the most important work that I will do on this planet will not be co-leading this church or whatever your thing is. Moving up in your company, starting that entrepreneurial initiative, making that certain amount of money, living in that certain house. But maybe some of the most important thing you'll do will be the simple, mundane moments of taking children to school, playing Uno for the 15th time, answering all of their many questions about life and why it looks a certain way. Or maybe it's even more deeper than that. Maybe it's helping shape their thinking of sexuality because your parents never did that for you. Maybe it's helping them learn the quiet whisper of God and what God might be calling them into for their career or their future. Maybe it's helping them learn how to be a light for Jesus in their school or their part-time job. Maybe it's helping form and disciple the next generations. In so many ways, children are what challenge me the most to live like Jesus. And in so many ways, I am constantly reminded that I am forming and shaping these little ones, and that is no small thing. I invite you to stand this morning. The band's coming, and we're going to transition into a time of communion. But before we do that, I just want to take a moment to pray with you. Heavenly Father, we just take a moment, Holy Spirit, just lean into your sensitivity this morning. Jesus, I know the topic of parents and children can just bring up all kinds of different emotions for many of us. So, Father, I just pray that, Lord, would we open ourselves to your healing today? Where healing needs to happen, I pray, Holy Spirit, would you come in and bring your peace and your love in profound ways. I pray for the children that are part of Forest City. I pray that in these early years of their life, would they learn about the goodness of who you are. May they see this place as a safe place to explore and to be themselves. I pray for the parents in this room. I pray for those parents who consistently show up for their kids. Lord, would you give them energy today? Would you remind them that changing a diaper might be the most impactful thing that they do on this planet? Would you give them a vision for the higher calling, the deeper work of the formation and the discipleship of the next generation? Father, I just pray for Forest City. May we be a home for children who have no home. May we be a place for parents who are weary and tired. May we be a place for those who are single but find real purpose that comes alive by helping inform and shape children. May we be a place that continually creates space for children to grow and to learn the ways of God. May we be Jesus. May we be Jesus to those that are most precious among us. We ask these things in your beautiful name.